Grayson passionately declares his love and begs Esther to marry him. Envisioning a beautiful future, a bride joyfully accepts Sir Razilvisto's unexpected proposal. Grayson forces his feelings onto Esther, but the 22-year-old firmly rejects his romantic advances. Working as a dedicated pharmacist at the Bertova Botanical Garden, Esther dismisses his arrogant assumptions about her future. She sharply reminds the persistent suitor that he already has a fiancée. Glancing toward the entrance, they spot the looming presence of Katia waiting at the gate. The prominent and beautiful Katia glares with intense jealousy, deeply resenting her fiancé's obsession with another woman. Driven by overwhelming pride, Katia harbors a toxic hostility toward anyone catching Grayson's attention. Fearing for her family's reputation, Esther coldly orders Grayson to leave her alone and focuses strictly on her botanical work. Ignoring her boundaries, Grayson stubbornly insists she is his only true love, blaming his parents for the unwanted engagement. Frustrated by his relentless obsession, Esther realizes he never listens to a single word she says. A startled coworker suddenly interrupts, nervously hovering near Esther's locker. The frightened woman apologizes for mistakenly opening the compartment, cowering under Esther's intense gaze. Masking her irritation, Esther calmly reassures the terrified coworker that everyone makes mistakes. The woman awkwardly retreats, hoping she hasn't angered the imposing pharmacist. Onlookers whisper about Esther's notoriously tough and unapproachable demeanor, completely overshadowing her striking beauty. Rumors spread like wildfire, painting Esther as a terrifying seductress who mercilessly deceives the devoted Katia's fiancé. Malicious gossip rapidly solidifies Esther's reputation as a wicked woman throughout the botanical garden. Struggling with a naturally harsh resting face, Esther silently laments her inability to express gentle emotions. Her clumsy attempts at friendliness only backfire, attracting strange men and earning her the title of the town's most evil woman. Despite being an orphan, she remembers the abundant love provided by her adoptive parents. Resolving to endure the cruel gossip, Esther vows to protect her family's name and repay their boundless kindness. Suddenly, panicked screams echo through the garden as a crowd gathers around the collapsing Katia. Katia drops to the ground in agonizing pain immediately after taking a sip of poison tea. Confusion and terror grip the bystanders as they frantically wonder who could have committed such a heinous crime. Suspicious eyes immediately dart toward Esther, the only pharmacist with full access to the garden's dangerous chemicals. A stern investigator abruptly halts Esther, demanding she stay exactly where she is. Accusing her of being the sole logical culprit, he demands a thorough search of all her personal belongings. Staring down her accusers, Esther firmly denies having any involvement in the poisoning. Refusing to be treated like a common criminal, she defiantly invites them to investigate her bags. A sinister gasp ripples through the crowd as a suspicious vial is pulled directly from her property. The investigator dramatically holds up the damning evidence for everyone to see. Shock turns into outrage as they identify the highly poisonous label marking the fatal substance. The crowd realizes it is Lucaro grass, a strictly controlled toxin capable of causing severe respiratory failure and death. Panic setting in, Esther desperately screams that the lethal vial does not belong to her. Dismissing her frantic pleas, the accuser sneers and points out that everyone present just witnessed the discovery. Helpless and cornered, Esther's words completely fail her as the malicious trap snaps shut. An enraged mob instantly forms, demanding blood for the attempted murder of a noblewoman. Vicious accusations hurl through the air, condemning her for tricking Grayson and poisoning his innocent bride. Dragged away by the furious townsfolk, a tearful Esther wonders how her quiet life shattered into such a horrifying nightmare. The cruel authorities brutally deport Esther Langet for attempted murder, warning her to be grateful they spared her life. A desperate voice suddenly screams Esther's name through the relentless, freezing rain. Tears streaming down her face, Esther turns in shock to see her beloved father and mother rushing toward her. Refusing to accept the unjust verdict, her parents fiercely vow to protest her innocence to protect her pure heart. Remembering her boundless passion for plants, her adoptive family eagerly offers to abandon their home and start a new life together. Touched by the unconditional love of her modest adoptive parents, Esther feels a profound surge of gratitude. Flashing back to the bloodthirsty mob demanding her death, Esther realizes she absolutely cannot drag her fragile family into danger. Masking her crushing heartbreak, she firmly decides to shoulder the burden and leave the town entirely on her own. Apologizing for the unfilial separation, Esther painfully accepts her cruel fate as a universally hated outcast. Bidding a tearful final farewell, she silently thanks her parents for a lifetime of unwavering affection. Stepping into the cold storm, Esther faces a terrifyingly lonely journey completely devoid of hope. She tragically reflects on her shattered dream of working as a pharmacist and living peacefully with her cherished family. Bracing against the harsh reality, Esther steels her unyielding resolve to rely solely on her own strength. Burning with defiance, she fiercely curses the obsessed man and the jealous woman who ruined her innocent life. Exhausted and starving, Esther marches through the grueling downpour, stubbornly refusing to surrender to despair. Shivering near the border, the weary traveler desperately scans the dark wilderness for any sign of a safe shelter. To her dismay, the desolate landscape reveals absolutely no houses or sanctuaries in the creeping shadows. Suddenly, a menacing presence emerges from the thick brush, instantly freezing Esther in her tracks. Pure panic seizes her racing heart as vicious wild dogs encircle her with snapping, bared fangs. Facing a gruesome death by stray dogs, Esther furiously curses the sickening injustice of dying for a fabricated crime. A massive, glowing white beast suddenly erupts from the darkness, violently intercepting the deadly pack. The majestic creature unleashes a terrifying, ground-shaking growl, scattering the cowardly wild dogs in an instant. Awestruck by the giant animal's incredible power, Esther watches the lethal threat vanish completely into the night. Realizing the towering beast just saved her life, a massive wave of profound relief washes over the battered girl. Whispering a faint, trembling thank you, Esther completely drains the last drops of her remaining strength. Overwhelming exhaustion suddenly crashes down upon her, clouding her dizzy mind in a suffocating dark fog. Her vision completely blacks out as she hopelessly collapses face-first into the freezing mud. The giant white wolf gently approaches her unconscious, shivering body under the relentless pouring rain. Drifting into an endless void, Esther wonders what terrifying fate ultimately awaits her broken soul. Her eyes slowly flutter open to the blinding, comforting warmth of a completely unfamiliar room. A cheerful head maid named Bona warmly introduces herself, explaining she rescued Esther from her soaking wet clothes. Still intensely groggy, Esther confusedly asks if the massive beast named Ravis is actually a giant white wolf. Bona enthusiastically recounts how Ravis completely shocked the entire castle by carefully carrying the cute little girl home. Chuckling brightly, the maid clarifies that Ravis is actually a highly unique creature known in this country as a Valen. Proudly revealing her pointed ears, Bona explains that the country of Evenant is famously home to beastmen and elves. Utterly astounded by the beautiful elven maid, Esther silently absorbs the magical reality of her incredible new surroundings. Realizing she miraculously crossed the border into Evenant, Esther officially introduces herself to the deeply kind maid. Delighted by the exceptionally lovely name, Bona cheerfully praises Esther's rapidly recovering, glowing complexion. The maid playfully notes that even the notoriously fierce Ravis couldn't possibly ignore such a stunningly beautiful young lady. Inviting the starving girl to a steaming hot meal, Bona warmly guides Esther toward the bustling, welcoming dining room. In a magnificent dining hall, Esther weeps with joy as she devours her first delicious meal in days. Nursing her bruised pride, she wonders who could possibly own such a massive, luxurious castle right on the border. The elven head maid, Bona, suddenly interrupts her thoughts to announce that His Majesty has requested her presence. Esther gasps in disbelief as Bona reveals that the master of the castle is none other than the king of Evenant. Terrifying rumors flash through her mind of King Razilvisto Bernardo, a ruthless 28-year-old monarch feared as a heartless beast. Anxious and confused, Esther wonders why such a merciless king would offer a warm bed and hot food to a complete stranger. Bona calmly leads her down the pristine corridors, telling her to wait patiently outside the towering double doors. Trembling with nerves, the young pharmacist tries to steady her breathing as she prepares to face the fearsome sovereign. A deep, commanding voice suddenly echoes from the throne, demanding to know her name. Looking up, Esther is utterly stunned to find a breathtakingly handsome young man instead of a monstrous tyrant. She quickly compares her shocking situation to the tales of banished noble villainesses who fall into a dark fate. The young king, Razilvisto Bernardo, demands her name and origin once more with absolute, spine-chilling authority. Bowing politely, the exiled girl introduces herself as Esther Langet and offers her sincere thanks for the shelter. Staring her down with piercing eyes, Razilvisto coldly demands to know her exact age and homeland. She nervously replies that she is 22 years old and originally hails from the town of Bertova. The king sharply questions why a woman from Bertova would be wandering alone deep inside his personal forest territory. Esther freezes in panic, knowing she cannot easily admit she was brutally exiled under false accusations of attempted murder. Razilvisto's gaze narrows as he bluntly accuses the trembling pharmacist of being a secret spy from Bertova. Furious at the false accusation, Esther desperately defends herself and insists she is absolutely not a spy. The king demands the truth, pointing out that she was found collapsed in his woods and nursed back to health. To her shock, Esther realizes it was the intimidating king himself who saved her, not just a wild beast. She explains that she is merely a harmless pharmacist who got lost, having never held a weapon in her life. Unmoved by her pleas, King Razilvisto demands she demonstrate her actual worth to prove her innocence. The word echoes in Esther's mind as she desperately wonders what value a simple commoner could offer a powerful king. He gives her 5 days to prepare an antidote for the deadly Recaro grass using the castle's potion room. The sovereign delivers a chilling warning, restricting her to the botanical garden and threatening swift punishment if she escapes. Staring into his predatory, beast-like eyes, Esther realizes she must complete this impossible task to survive. Steeling her resolve, she silently vows to conquer this trial and prove her innocence once and for all. Refusing to surrender to her cruel fate, she decides to reclaim her future through her own strength as a pharmacist. Bona offers a comforting smile and eagerly agrees to guide the determined young woman to the botanical garden. Stepping inside, Esther gasps in absolute wonder at the legendary, rare plants she had only ever seen in ancient books. She marvels at the pristine conditions, noting that the entire greenhouse is kept in flawless, meticulous order. Deeply impressed by the thriving flora, Esther instantly respects the incredible skill of the garden's caretaker. Bona stops before a large, heavy door and introduces the castle's fully equipped potion room. Crossing the threshold, Esther is amazed by the spacious, state-of-the-art laboratory before her. Bona explains that the room is managed by the court pharmacist, Demicola, who frequently vanishes for weeks. Since Demicola has been gone for a week, the friendly maid tells Esther she is free to use the lab as she pleases. Scanning the endless rows of ancient texts, Esther quietly wonders if such a flighty royal pharmacist is truly dependable. Expressing her deepest gratitude, Esther smiles as Bona promises to return and fetch her when dinner is ready. Left alone in the quiet sanctuary, Esther takes a deep breath and prepares to conquer her daunting 5-day challenge. Demanding absolute proof of her skills, the king issues a daunting ultimatum to synthesize an antidote for the deadly Recaro grass within 5 days. Haunted by the bitter memories of Katia and Grayson, Esther silently curses her twisted fate as she confronts the infamous poison. Resentment boils within her as she realizes Grayson cowardly abandoned her to the criminal charges, leaving him entirely free to prepare for his wedding with the scheming Katia. Pushing aside the painful betrayal, the exiled pharmacist fondly remembers the warm, loving faces of her beloved adoptive parents. Shaking off her overwhelming despair, she violently forces her focus back to the present, determined to seize this single chance at survival. Diving headfirst into the daunting challenge, Esther furiously scours the towering mountain of ancient texts for any useful reference materials. 3 grueling days vanish in the blink of an eye, leaving the frustrated pharmacist groaning in pure exhaustion over her bubbling cauldrons. Frustration rapidly mounts as every single desperate attempt yields a flawed potion with the completely wrong concentration. Staring intensely at her meticulous notes, she furiously questions why her absolutely perfect calculations keep failing. Releasing a heavy, defeated sigh, the exhausted girl desperately struggles to keep her breaking spirit intact. Needing a crucial mental break, she decides to step outside for some fresh air, carefully ensuring she remains strictly within the permitted castle grounds. Stepping into the courtyard, a soothing breeze instantly washes over her tense body, providing a fleeting moment of pure relief. Grasping the terrifying reality of her looming deadline, she fiercely vows to complete the impossible antidote within the final 2 days. A sudden chill violently shoots down her spine as she recalls the terrifying beast-like gaze of the ruthless king. Puzzling over the beautiful but chilling monarch, she wonders why King Razilvisto chooses to inhabit a secluded old fortress instead of the grand capital. Spotting a massive white shape in the brush, Esther excitedly dashes forward to thank the magnificent creature that saved her life. Approaching the giant beast with gentle caution, she softly expresses her deepest gratitude to the wolf for carrying her safely to the castle. Acknowledging that she is still trapped in a deadly predicament, she tearfully admits she would have been violently torn apart by wild dogs without his intervention. Introducing herself with a warm, genuine smile, she gently confirms that the towering guardian's name is Ravis. Gazing in pure awe at his shimmering coat, the exiled pharmacist marvels at the majestic beauty of the massive canine. Quickly correcting her innocent mistake, she remembers the maid's words and politely addresses him as a noble Valen. Leaning in with bright curiosity, Esther asks if the highly intelligent creature can actually understand her spoken words. Desperate for any form of companionship, she softly pleads with the giant Valen to listen to her heavy burdens for just a little while. Pouring out her shattered heart, she tragically confesses how she was brutally exiled after being framed for a horrific attempted murder. She bitterly recounts how the intensely jealous Katia planted a lethal poison in her bag, violently turning the entire town against her. Gesturing to her own tough features, she sadly explains that her naturally fierce face always drove people away and made her an easy target for malicious rumors. Masking her profound sorrow, Esther proudly reveals that she embraced the cruel exile purely to protect her fiercely loving adoptive parents. Realizing she has been rambling, she smiles warmly as she notices the giant beast patiently listening to her tragic tale. Emboldened by his surprising gentleness, the lonely girl tentatively asks if she can step closer to his massive form. Unable to read the stoic Valen's unreadable expression, she cautiously interprets his absolute silence as a quiet invitation. Relief washes over her as she realizes the terrifying guardian has completely lowered his guard and accepted her presence. She instinctively apologizes as Ravis emits a low rumble, briefly fearing she overstepped by wanting to touch his inviting fur. Peering closer, Esther gasps in sudden surprise upon noticing that the beast's ornate collar perfectly matches King Razalvisto's choker. Her terrifying image of the cold-hearted king cracks as she wonders if the ruthless monarch actually secretly dotes on his beloved pets. A genuine, radiant smile finally breaks across her face as she tenderly admires the giant creature's unexpected cuteness. Ravis rumbles softly in response, allowing the brave pharmacist to fully bridge the physical gap between them. Burying her face into his incredibly fluffy coat, Esther finds absolute serenity in the giant beast's radiating warmth and comforting scent. Hugging him tightly, she emotionally declares the noble Valen to be her true hero and her sole confidant in this dangerous new world. Whispering deeply into his fur, the exiled girl pours every ounce of her soul into a profound, tearful thank you. Lulled by the creature's rhythmic breathing, sheer exhaustion finally overtakes her as the crushing tension of the past week completely melts away. A sudden, sharp voice cuts through the tranquil silence, urgently calling Lady Esther's name. Startled awake, she finds an anxious Bona hovering nearby, deeply worried by her sudden disappearance from the potion room. Confusion washes over the groggy pharmacist as she astonishingly realizes she actually fell asleep out in the open. Spotting a warm blanket draped over her shoulders, she wildly wonders if the giant beast somehow placed it there. Panic swiftly sets in as she violently curses her own foolishness for using the royal pet as a makeshift pillow. Bona seriously warns her to absolutely never enter His Majesty's forbidden private garden ever again. Later in her room, a heavily stuffed Esther happily praises Bona's incredibly delicious cooking. A sudden, heavy knock at the door instantly shatters the peaceful evening atmosphere. A deep, mocking voice playfully demands the little bunny to open the door immediately. Shock violently jolts through her system as she recognizes the imposing presence waiting in the hall. Opening the heavy door, an incredibly awkward tension fills the air as she directly faces King Razalvisto. Stammering nervously, she immediately attempts to excuse the incomplete state of the highly demanded antidote. The imposing monarch coldly dismisses her frantic excuses, flatly stating he is not there to discuss the medicine. Staring intently into her eyes, he bluntly demands to know if she truly fears that giant beast. Terrified that he witnessed her forbidden nap, she desperately bows her head in a frantic, stammering apology. Rejecting her frantic apologies, Razalvisto forcefully presses her to explain exactly why she dared to touch the fearsome creature. A curious thought flickers through her racing mind as she wonders why the king entirely refuses to use Ravis's actual name. Mustering her trembling courage, she bravely declares she feels absolutely no fear toward the noble beast who saved her life. She confidently shocks the intimidating king by proudly proclaiming that she and the giant wolf have actually become genuine friends. Smiling warmly, she playfully praises the supposedly terrifying creature as a very good boy who pouts cutely when called a dog. A rare, genuine chuckle surprisingly escapes Razilvisto's lips, instantly catching the deeply confused pharmacist completely off guard. Shaking his head in pure disbelief, he dramatically mocks her as a stunningly foolish and hopelessly fearless person. Seizing the bizarrely peaceful moment, Esther fiercely vows to flawlessly complete the antidote without ever attempting to escape. Pushing her unbelievable luck, she boldly requests official permission to converse with the giant Ravis in the garden again. Maintaining his icy exterior, the king casually grants her request as long as the beast willingly permits it. Esther gasps in absolute wonder, entirely convinced she just witnessed a genuine, fleeting smile grace the ruthless monarch's face. Turning to leave, Razilvisto abruptly snaps a stern command forbidding her from ever sleeping in the open garden again. He awkwardly masks his unexpected concern, grumbling that dealing with a sick pharmacist would simply be a massive hassle. A massive realization suddenly strikes her as she connects the mysterious warm blanket directly to the surprisingly caring king. Reflecting on his strange kindness, she silently concludes the notoriously cold-blooded ruler is actually far more merciful than the vicious rumors claim. A profound sense of relief washes over her as she realizes he never truly intended to execute her from the very beginning. The following day, a fiercely determined Esther masterfully steams the final crucial herbs to meet the looming deadline. She happily credits her rapidly returning focus entirely to the wonderfully refreshing conversation she shared with the gentle Ravis. Sorrow suddenly weighs heavily down her heart as she realizes today might be her very last encounter with her massive, furry friend. Dread slowly creeps back in as she tragically wonders where a hated, exiled pharmacist could ever possibly find a welcoming home. Gazing at the giant beast, she sadly reflects on how the terrified castle servants completely misunderstand his inherently gentle, cute nature. A deep, profound empathy bridges their silent gap as she emotionally recognizes his intense, heartbreaking loneliness mirrors her own. Staring wistfully into the bubbling cauldron, she desperately wishes she could just remain in this castle as an official pharmacist. A sudden, sharp growl violently shatters the quiet moment as Ravis abruptly springs to his feet in high alert. Left entirely alone in the echoing garden, a heartbroken Esther mourns the sudden, unexplained departure of her only true friend. Reflecting on her bittersweet journey, Esther realizes her final day in the castle has arrived after initially cursing her tragic exile. Overwhelmed by gratitude, she marvels at how the kind servants and Ravis warmly welcomed her without ever interrogating her dark past. Bolstered by their unexpected affection, the exiled pharmacist discovers a newfound strength to boldly walk forward toward her uncertain future. Regretting her limited interactions with His Highness, she resolves to perform one final act of gratitude before departing the sanctuary. Bona cheerfully interrupts her quiet reflection, politely inviting Lady Esther to the grand dining hall for her evening meal. Sensing a sudden, chilling shift in the atmosphere, an anxious Esther quickly asks the maid if something terrible happened to His Majesty. A heavy, metallic stench violently floods the corridor, overwhelming her senses with the raw, terrifying smell of a wild beast. Emerging from the suffocating shadows, the imposing figure of King Razilvisto violently freezes Esther in her tracks. Spotting his drenched form, she frantically offers to tend his wounds, but the king harshly orders her back to prevent bloodstains. Razilvisto coldly rejects her frantic assistance, bluntly declaring that the crimson liquid completely coating his body is not his own. Absolute terror paralyses the young pharmacist as her trembling eyes lock onto the massive, blood-soaked sword firmly gripped in his hand. Sickened by the gruesome sight, she silently wonders what horrifying cruelty those stained hands just inflicted upon another living soul. Tears rapidly welling in her eyes, she desperately demands how he can maintain such chilling composure after committing unspeakable violence. Staring into his impassive face, a heartbroken Esther tragically confesses she truly believed the infamous monarch was secretly a kind person. The ruthless king slightly tilts his head, offering a mocking, icy glare in response to her shattered expectations. Horrified by his monstrous aura, she fiercely accuses him of mercilessly slaughtering someone in cold blood with that heavy blade. Scoffing at the frightened little bunny, Razilvisto cruelly asks if she seriously expected a lawless rumor to possess a human heart. Stepping dangerously close, the terrifying king forcefully grabs her chin, violently dominating the incredibly tense atmosphere. Razilvisto sharply commands her to stop clinging to sweet dreams and fiercely orders her to never hold onto him again. Releasing his heavy grip, he exhales a cold breath and bluntly states he never expected a fragile human to understand his brutal reality. Crushed by his venomous rejection, a devastated Esther realizes her hopeful belief that they had grown closer was a complete illusion. Tears freely streaming down her cheeks, she bitterly accepts that his fleeting moments of kindness were merely a foolish misunderstanding. The heavy wooden door forcefully slams shut, abruptly leaving the weeping girl entirely alone in the suffocating darkness. Shivering in isolation, she vividly remembers the terrified servants warning her that angering the reckless majesty guarantees a swift, brutal death. Haunted by his chilling glare, she cannot erase the terrifying memory of those beastly eyes aggressively rejecting absolutely everything. Despite his monstrous display, a profound sorrow violently grips her heart as she recognizes a deep, mirrored loneliness hiding within his fury. A sudden, soft knock at her chamber door violently shatters her melancholic trance, prompting her to wonder who approaches so late. Bona gently enters the quiet room with a comforting smile, warmly offering a freshly prepared sandwich to soothe the distressed girl. Accepting the kind gesture with a surprised gasp, Esther suddenly realizes she entirely skipped her evening meal during the horrifying confrontation. Clutching the warm food, the exhausted pharmacist sincerely thanks the compassionate elven maid for her unwavering, tender care. Bona seriously implores Esther not to harbor hatred toward His Majesty, revealing the shocking truth that the brutal bloodshed was entirely for her sake. Utterly bewildered by this massive revelation, a stunned Esther desperately demands the maid explain the meaning behind those cryptic words. Bona ominously reveals that heavily armed beastmen were violently targeting Ravis as direct revenge for sheltering the exiled human. Unfamiliar with the kingdom's unique species, a thoroughly confused Esther urgently asks Bona to explain exactly what beastmen are. The elven maid calmly clarifies that beastmen are powerful shapeshifters, revealing that even its entire formidable Night Order belongs to this versatile race. A horrifying realization violently strikes Esther as she suspects the vicious wild dogs from the rainy border were actually hostile beastmen. Reeling from the massive bombshell, she instantly deduces that her massive, furry savior Ravis must also be a shape-shifting beastman. Bona awkwardly chuckles, revealing that absurd rumors falsely paint Esther as a nation-toppling beauty exclusively favored by the secluded king. The distressed maid sighs heavily, noting the sheer danger caused by gullible enemies actually believing the ridiculous, exaggerated gossip. Exploiting the old castle's weaker defenses, the foolish attackers desperately attempted a kidnapping, blindly believing Esther was His Majesty's ultimate, flawless weakness. Bona urgently revealed that Lord Resolvisto only drew his blade to shield Esther from harm. She passionately emphasized that His Majesty never struck down anyone without a just cause. Crushed by guilt, Esther realized she had mercilessly hurled harsh words at Lord Resolvisto without understanding the truth. She bitterly recalled demanding to know if the monarch even possessed a heart. A gentle, reassuring voice pierced through her spiraling regrets, insisting that everything remained perfectly fine. Bona admitted she felt deeply moved watching Esther erupt in anger, noting no one had ever dared challenge His Majesty so fearlessly. Resolving to fix her mistake, Esther declared she would deliver a proper apology the very next day. She warmly thanked Bona for offering such crucial comfort. A heavy sorrow anchored Esther's heart as she faced her impending departure. She somberly accepted this would likely be her absolute final chance to speak with Lord Resolvisto. Shifting her focus to alchemical mastery, Esther acknowledged her brewing mixture remained highly toxic but served as the only antidote to Lucaro. The volatile alchemical process demanded her complete, unwavering concentration as she fought to stabilize the dangerous remedy. Wiping away sweat, she finally conquered the arduous process and proudly declared the life-saving medicine complete. She immediately commanded a knight to guide the delivery of the freshly brewed concoction. The critical medicine was dispatched without a single wasted second to the designated target. The frantic delivery mission targeted a humble, rustic village located just outside the imposing castle walls. Navigating the quiet settlement, she locked onto her destination at the back left of the village entrance. Marching up to the wooden frame, she knocked decisively and politely announced her sudden arrival. A bewildered resident opened the door, prompting Esther to quickly introduce herself as a guest from the old forest castle. Stumbling slightly under the immense pressure, she fought to clearly explain the reason for her abrupt intrusion. Regaining her fierce composure, she revealed she carried a freshly synthesized antidote for the deadly Lucaro grass poison. She urgently explained that Lady Demicola's unexpected absence had terrified her into thinking the medicine might arrive too late. Grasping the lethal gravity of the situation, the desperate resident swiftly ushered Esther into the modest home. They quickly deduced that lethal lucero grass had been disastrously mixed into the family's daily food supply. Scanning the weakening patient, Esther confirmed the terrifyingly pale face perfectly matched the symptoms of lucero poisoning. Refusing to waste another breath, she thrust the vital antidote forward and ordered immediate administration. Carefully tilting the boy's head back, they gently commanded him to open his mouth and accept the cure. A fragile, breathless gasp escaped the patient's lips as the potent liquid washed down his throat. Watching with bated breath, Esther anxiously muttered that the treatment should stabilize him now. A suffocating silence gripped the room as everyone prayed the antidote would overpower the rampant toxin. A massive wave of relief crashed over the room as the boy's breathing steadied and a healthy flush ignited his pale cheeks. The weeping villagers showered Esther with gratitude, confessing their paralyzing fear that the weakening boy would not survive the night. Flashing a soft smile, Esther instructed them to provide the recovering patient with abundant nutrition and absolute rest. A triumphant sense of fulfillment roared through Esther's veins as she watched a fragile life snatched back from death. Staring at her in absolute awe, the grateful villagers breathlessly asked if she had truly forged this miraculous cure herself. A jubilant crowd swarmed around her, marveling that another phenomenal pharmacist existed to rival Lady Demicola. Esther stood completely mesmerized as the entire village passionately celebrated the survival of a neighbor's child. Her heart hammered with an unfamiliar, thrilling joy, realizing she had never experienced such profound, collective gratitude. Basking in the radiant warmth of their cheers, she felt an overwhelming rush of happiness for answering the call to help. Back in the castle's strategic halls, a definitive report confirmed the antidote functioned flawlessly and the patient rapidly recovered. An observer sharply noted that forging a cure to save that specific child had undeniably been the supreme goal from the start. A tense moment of silence underscored the astronomical effort poured into securing this singular, fragile victory. However, a chilling reality surfaced as someone recalled Bono warning that the antidote's miraculous effects would expire in exactly 1 week. Crushing all doubts, Lord Razalvisto firmly declared he would mobilize every resource to save the child because every citizen's life held absolute, equal value. Esther's perspective shattered and rebuilt itself, finally understanding that beneath his frigid exterior, His Majesty passionately protected the lives of his people. Esther quietly reflected on how Razalvisto successfully saved a child's life by ordering an antidote for the absent pharmacist. Overwhelmed with immense joy, she realized her timely success only happened because Lord Razalvisto placed his absolute trust in her. Grasping the grim reality, she noted the child would have died without his orders and asked why he refused to accompany her. She gently suggested it would have been vastly better if His Majesty delivered the medicine directly to the deeply grateful villagers. Staring coldly ahead, Razalvisto starkly explained that humans inherently harbor a deep, unshakable hatred for animals like him. He bluntly stated that revealing his beastly face to the innocent villagers would only strike terror into their fragile hearts. Crushed by the weight of her past cruelty, Esther vividly remembered asking if he even possessed a heart. Tears pricking her eyes, she deeply apologized for hurling such terrible insults yesterday without understanding the full truth. She regretfully admitted assuming he lacked compassion, confessing her misguided anger hurt him despite his clear respect for life. Analyzing his isolated existence, she deduced His Majesty keeps people at a distance because similar prejudices wounded him deeply in the past. Drawing painful parallels, she reflected on how she also closes her heart and pretends to be strong when unfairly painted as a villain. Though fearing it rude to compare herself to a ruling monarch, she felt a profound connection to his lonely, wandering existence. With absolute, unshakable conviction, she firmly declared that Lord Razalvisto is definitely not a ruthless, heartless beast. Stunned by her fierce and sudden defense, Razalvisto momentarily paused to process the intense sincerity radiating from her. Shattering the tender atmosphere, he coldly reminded her that he genuinely drew his sword to take a life, dismissing Bona's excuses. He harshly warned her that harboring sweet, naive fantasies about his nature would only lead to immediate and crushing disappointment. Refusing to back down, Esther boldly asserted that his underlying kindness is an undeniable reality she witnessed firsthand. Scoffing at her stubborn innocence, Razalvisto warned that an overly optimistic little rabbit would be eaten alive outside the castle walls. Unfazed by his dark warning, she confidently maintained her absolute belief in the gentle heart she had personally experienced. Shifting the heavy tension, she nervously interrupted to offer him a small, carefully prepared token of her appreciation. Presenting a delicate flower cologne, she explained the gift served as a heartfelt expression of gratitude for his continuous protection. Bowing respectfully, she thanked him for absolutely everything, treating the quiet moment like a final, permanent goodbye. Incensed by her implied departure, Razilvisto fiercely demanded to know who permitted her to escape, interpreting the gift as a farewell. He aggressively dismissed her fears of being a useless spy, declaring a powerless rabbit like her held immense value for other purposes. Calculating his next strategic move, he assumed she had already heard the absurd rumors circulating thanks to Bona's loose lips. He casually mentioned the wild gossip falsely labeling her as a nation-turning beauty who had become His Majesty's absolute favorite. While acknowledging the rumor as a massive nuisance, he slyly pointed out that it could easily be weaponized to their mutual advantage. Formulating a cunning plan, he suggested using the existence of the baby rabbit as the perfect excuse for his prolonged stay in the old castle. Thoroughly confused by his rapid, calculating scheme, Esther nervously asked what exactly he wanted from her going forward. Radiating commanding authority, Lord Razilvisto bluntly ordered the stunned girl to become his personal woman. Utterly blindsided by the explosive demand, a loud, panicked gasp escaped Esther's lips as her entire mind short-circuited. Her thoughts raced back to her tragic past as a banished noble daughter, now hopelessly captured by a terrifying, beastly monarch. The sheer, paralyzing weight of his blunt command to become his woman echoed deafeningly in her ringing ears. She struggled intensely to comprehend the absolute absurdity of a disgraced exile suddenly becoming His Highness Razilvisto's lover. Flashbacks of being unfairly exiled for murder and hated as a bewitching villainess flooded her frantic, overwhelmed thoughts. Exhausted by her turbulent history, she internally sighed, having completely lost all lingering desire to be tossed around by dramatic romance. Smirking at her visible panic, Razilvisto clarified it would only be a fake engagement, brutally reminding the scared bunny she had nowhere to run. He laid out the simple, non-negotiable terms, ordering her to maintain the charade only until Dominic, the official court pharmacist, returned. Sweetening the deal immensely, he officially granted her unrestricted access to the vast library, potion room, and magnificent botanical garden. Instantly seduced by the promise of unlimited resources, Esther realized this arrangement would allow her to forge unimaginable new medicines. Stunned by the unexpected reaction, Esther wondered in sheer disbelief if His Majesty had just genuinely laughed at her. She boldly questioned why a ruling monarch would isolate himself in an ancient forest castle, deducing he intended to use her mere existence as a strategic camouflage. Shutting her down instantly, Razilvisto fiercely ordered her not to pry into classified matters she simply did not need to know. A tense, awkward silence hung heavily in the air as Esther stumbled over her words in nervous shock. Panicking internally, she aggressively chastised herself for once again blurting out unnecessary questions without understanding the deeper political situation. Despite the terrifying aura surrounding him, a burning curiosity ignited within her heart as she desperately wanted to uncover more about the enigmatic king. A month smoothly passed in the ancient stronghold, bringing a delivery of freshly requested herbs to fuel her alchemical pursuits. Gratefully accepting the vital ingredients, she confidently announced she could finally brew the specialized medicine that had been explicitly ordered. Overcoming her initial fears of not fitting in, Esther warmly reflected on how the castle's inhabitants had completely accepted her into their fulfilling lives. Eager to share her newly acquired culinary skills, she proudly presented a batch of freshly baked scones crafted under Bona's expert guidance. She excitedly held out the golden, delicious-looking treats to the massive beast, hoping to entice his monstrous appetite. Chuckling at the yawning creature's absolute disinterest, she internally rejoiced that working as an apothecary felt like an incredible, peaceful fantasy. Snuggling fearlessly into the beast's unbelievably fluffy fur, she marveled at his uniquely warm scent that perfectly defied ordinary flowers or soap. Tempted to reach for his massive tail, she cautiously hesitated while vividly remembering the terrifying growl he unleashed the last time she dared to try. Startled by a sudden, intense growling fit from the beast, Esther wildly lost her balance and tumbled backward in sheer panic. A strange man suddenly caught her fall, asking if she was okay while her mind raced to place his vaguely familiar face. The cheerful stranger laughed apologetically, swearing he only interrupted their quiet moment accidentally while tirelessly searching for His Majesty. Utterly confused by his implication of a bad time, Esther smoothly assured him not to worry since she was merely chatting with Ravis. Staring at her with wide, calculating eyes, The newcomer internally debated whether the wild rumors spreading across the capital were actually true. Utterly flabbergasted, he gasped at the sheer audacity of this young woman casually addressing the terrifying beast without an ounce of fear. Quickly recovering her manners, she warmly introduced herself as Esther and sharply noted that he clearly wasn't a standard knight stationed at this old castle. Introducing himself as Rianthio, the surprisingly young commander of the royal capital's Knight Order slyly acknowledged her as the highly rumored fiancée. He smirked, openly wondering what kind of mesmerizing woman could completely captivate a romance-indifferent king and trap him in an ancient fortress. Rianthio boldly praised her incredible beauty, jokingly admitting he would have heavily pursued her if the terrifying threat of execution wasn't hanging over his head. Deflecting his dangerous flirting, Esther helpfully suggested that Lord Razilvisto was currently locked away in his office and offered to summon Bona. Shocking Rianthio to his absolute core, she innocently pointed to the massive creature and casually claimed that Ravis was merely His Highness's giant pet. She completely shattered the commander's understanding of reality by gushing over the terrifying monster, proudly declaring the beast was cute, fluffy, and an excellent listener. Bursting into hysterical laughter as he finally connected the dots, Rianthio enthusiastically praised the amazing Esther for miraculously taming such a wild situation. Seamlessly transitioning to deadly serious business, the commander invited himself along, warning Esther that his impending report heavily involved her immediate future. Marching into the king's presence, Rianthio presented an elegant, high-stakes invitation to an extravagant ball hosted by the rival kingdom of Lipperain. Barely glancing at the royal summons, Lord Razilvisto brutally commanded his subordinate to burn the ridiculous piece of trash immediately. Anticipating this exact fiery rejection, Rianthio smoothly pleaded with the stubborn monarch to at least hear the critical strategic implications before destroying it. He urgently reminded Razilvisto that Lipperain remained a hyper-dangerous enemy constantly plotting invasion, making this sudden diplomatic invitation incredibly suspicious. Analyzing the enemy's cunning motives, Rianthio deduced Lipperain was aggressively probing the isolated king to uncover whatever dark secrets he hid in the frontier. He delivered a crushing ultimatum, warning that violently rejecting the invitation would instantly trigger catastrophic enemy surveillance on all their hidden movements. Rianthio confessed that the utterly bewildered ministers in the capital had desperately dispatched him as an envoy to force a strategic royal response. Trembling in the corner, Esther desperately wished she could flee, feeling heavily burdened by highly classified political secrets she never wanted to hear. Suddenly shifting his piercing gaze to the terrified girl, Razilvisto coldly interrogated Esther about her past experience with formal ballroom dancing. Crushing her last glimmer of hope, the king arrogantly confirmed he would drag her into the viper's nest because he absolutely refused to dance with anyone else. Horrified by her sudden, inescapable plunge into deadly royal politics, Esther screamed internally at the sheer, disastrous absurdity of his non-negotiable command. Commanding absolute obedience, Razilvisto orders Esther to master the complex dance steps within 2 grueling weeks while Bona prepares a stunning dress. Panic violently grips Esther as she frantically protests the incredibly unreasonable deadline due to her utter lack of dancing experience. Refusing to accept excuses, Razilvisto fiercely commands her to hammer the steps into her body until she is flawlessly ready for the grand event. Shattering the intense atmosphere, Rianthio bluntly questions the couple's authenticity, asking if they are truly in love. The sharp-eyed knight commander aggressively points out the absolute lack of any romantic atmosphere radiating from the supposed lovers. Startled by his piercing intuition, Esther nervously admits to herself that Rianthio obviously understands his majesty far better than she does. Caught completely off guard by the dangerous interrogation, she stammers helplessly while scrambling to formulate a convincing lie. Sensing her rising panic, Razilvisto suddenly moves in, casting a massive, intimidating shadow over the flustered Esther. Glaring intensely at the commander, the beastly king aggressively accuses Rianthio of being incredibly rude to his chosen fiancée. Leaning in dangerously close, Razilvisto boldly asks the knight if he truly desires to witness the authentic depth of their intimate relationship. In a shocking, undeniable display of dominance, he suddenly plants a forceful, silencing kiss directly onto Esther's lips. Her mind violently short-circuits as a muffled, panicked gasp escapes her completely overwhelmed and trembling frame. Breaking the suffocating tension with a loud laugh, Rianthio quickly apologizes for severely overstepping his boundaries. Waving cheerfully as he departs, The commander promises to inform the minister of their attendance while Esther desperately tries to clarify the massive misunderstanding. Coughing nervously, she furiously demands to know why Razilvisto intentionally created such a deeply scandalous illusion of intimacy. The calculating king coldly explains that maintaining a tight, absolute circle of deception ensures their grand strategic plan runs flawlessly. Dismissing her frantic, lingering protests, he abruptly ends the conversation and orders her to commandeer the grand hall for practice. Glaring hotly at his retreating back, Esther quietly grumbles about how unfairly the stubborn monarch always manages to get his way. The sun dramatically rises on a new day, bringing fresh, daunting challenges to the ancient forest castle. Bursting onto the scene with vibrant, unstoppable energy, Bona enthusiastically calls out Esther's name. The lively maid eagerly reveals she has already heard the thrilling, unbelievable news regarding the upcoming royal ball directly from His Highness. Sweat dropping at the sheer magnitude of the situation, Esther shares Bona's absolute disbelief that the reclusive king is actually attending a public event. Swelling with fierce pride, Bona confidently promises to procure the most incredibly perfect dress to make Esther shine brilliantly. She winks playfully, swearing to aggressively investigate His Majesty's secret preferences to ensure the final outfit completely dazzles him. Laughing off the maid's wildly enthusiastic support, Esther nervously reminds herself that their scandalous engagement remains merely a strategic act. A heavy, exhausted sigh escapes her trembling lips as she accepts the monumental, terrifying task looming ominously before her. Wishing her immense, necessary luck, Bona cheerfully sends the nervous Esther off to begin her grueling solo dance practice. Marching boldly into the massive hall, Esther steels her resolve to give this daunting mission her absolute, unwavering everything. Standing completely stiff in the center of the vast room, she dramatically panics over having absolutely no idea where to even begin. Crushing regret washes over her as she desperately wishes she had swallowed her pride and begged someone for proper dancing instructions. Muttering to herself about basic steps, she suddenly freezes as a commanding, familiar voice echoes sharply through the empty hall. Spinning around in pure, unadulterated shock, she gasps upon finding His Highness Razilvisto casually leaning against the heavy wooden doors. A tense, heavy silence descends as the imposing monarch strides purposefully into the center of the grand practice space. Her heart hammers wildly against her ribs as she hesitantly asks if the terrifying Beast King actually intends to practice with her. Scoffing darkly at her foolish question, Razilvisto firmly declares he would never abandon her to struggle pathetically alone. Stunned by his profoundly unexpected compassion, Esther marvels internally at the gentle words completely hidden beneath his ferocious exterior. A warm, vivid blush ignites across her cheeks as she realizes the fearsome, untouchable monarch genuinely worries about her well-being. Closing the distance in a blinding flash, he powerfully grabs her delicate hand and pulls her into a firm, commanding dancing stance. Gasping at the shockingly intense proximity, her entire body tenses as his massive, towering frame completely envelopes her. Staring deeply into her wildly panicked eyes, Razilvisto softly commands her to relax and confidently lean her entire weight onto him. Esther's heart hammered wildly against her ribs as she stuttered a nervous agreement to the overwhelming situation. Panic violently gripped her as she completely crushed his foot, prompting a hasty, desperate apology. Maintaining absolute composure, Razilvisto calmly advised her to focus on the steps, noting he fully expected some initial clumsiness. Shocked by his unexpectedly gentle rhythm, Esther realized she had braced herself for far more forceful movements. She noted with quiet awe that the imposing monarch was flawlessly matching his breathing and pace to hers. The Beast King's fluid, graceful movements surprisingly exuded a soft, comforting warmth. A ticklish flutter filled her heart as she marveled at being treated with such careful, elegant devotion. Breaking the intimate silence, she earnestly praised Lord Razilvisto for his incredibly masterful dancing skills. Catching her stunned expression, he dryly pointed out that her face clearly betrayed her absolute disbelief. He effortlessly dismissed the high praise, smoothly explaining that formal practice remained a normal necessity for royalty. Completely mesmerized by his grace, she inwardly insisted his flawless skill was anything but normal. Overwhelmed by her own severe limits, she realized Razilvisto possessed the impossible ability to never feel nervous or depressed from failure. A sudden, intense wave of awareness washed over her as she realized she had never been this physically close to a man before. Gazing upward, She was instantly captivated by the strikingly handsome features of his face seen up close. The undeniable, raw strength of the thick arms securely holding her waist sent thrilling shivers down her spine. She felt completely eclipsed by the massive, solid breadth of his imposing chest. A profound realization struck her that every single aspect of his powerful being was entirely different from her own fragile frame. Deeply flustered, she completely lost her composure over the overwhelming physical reality of the male body. Desperately trying to rein in her racing heart, she frantically reminded herself to focus solely on mastering the dance steps. Shattering her intense concentration, Razilvisto abruptly demanded to know why she kept nervously averting her eyes. Stumbling over her words, Esther awkwardly confessed that the intense, suffocating proximity was making her incredibly nervous. Frowning slightly, he questioned why her shoulders remained so stubbornly stiff after he explicitly commanded her to relax. His voice dropped to a dangerously low rumble as he bluntly asked if she truly distrusted him that much. Panicking at the severe misunderstanding, she desperately insisted her physical stiffness had absolutely nothing to do with trust. Unfazed by her frantic protests, he coldly declared the practice completely over for the night if she could not properly focus. A sharp gasp of pure dismay escaped her trembling lips as he abruptly cut their intimate session short. Crushing guilt settled heavily into her chest, convincing the nervous girl she had foolishly angered him yet again. Fearing he might completely abandon their vital lessons, she vowed to properly apologize at the very start of their next practice. A heavy, mournful sigh escaped her lips as she aimlessly wandered the dim, quiet halls alone. Spotting a massive, familiar shape in the shadows, she softly called out to the giant beast named Ravis. Kneeling down with a heavy heart, she quietly apologized to Ravis for her sudden, mournful intrusion. Drowning in deep melancholy, she softly confessed she simply could not muster the vibrant energy to chat happily today. Leaning closer, she sought silent, desperate comfort from the towering, imposing creature. Surprised by a sudden shift in his massive frame, she blinked and worriedly asked the beast what was wrong. A startled gasp erupted from her as Ravis suddenly nudged her with a heavy, deeply comforting warmth. Shocked by his rare, open vulnerability, she hesitantly asked if she could actually touch the tail he usually fiercely protected. A warm smile finally broke through her sorrow as she realized the terrifying beast was genuinely trying to cheer her up. Filled with immense, overflowing gratitude, she softly thanked Ravis for his unexpected and deeply touching comfort. Burying her hands into his incredibly fluffy fur, she instantly melted into the soothing, tactile embrace. Releasing a long, shaky breath, she honestly admitted to the giant creature that she had been feeling deeply downhearted. Though thrilled that he practiced dancing with her, Esther ultimately ended up angering Lord Razilvisto once again. Overwhelmed by the intense situation, crippling nervousness quickly seized control of her entire being. Experiencing her very first time dancing intimately with a man, her frantic attempts to concentrate only forced her body to stiffen further. While others might dismiss it as a simple dance, the daunting physical closeness felt like a monumental hurdle to her. Growing up in her hometown, she had lived a sheltered life with almost zero contact with any men besides her protective father. Bearing hidden scars, she harbored deeply unpleasant and painful memories regarding past formal dances. Haunting memories of her school days resurfaced, recalling the cruel moment she overheard boys explicitly refusing to dance with her before the prom. The boys had cruelly labeled the seemingly high and mighty Esther as unapproachable, preferring quieter girls out of fear that she would glare at their missteps. Despite practicing relentlessly with the earnest help of her supportive parents, her lingering anxiety over the dance remained unyielding. Ultimately consumed by the terrifying dread of total rejection, she had cowardly fled from the dance floor entirely. Resigning herself to a life of constant misunderstandings, she permanently built defensive walls to keep a safe distance from everyone around her. Carrying that heavy emotional baggage, every new interaction now felt like a painfully difficult first experience. While she could effortlessly pour her heart out to her beast companion Ravis, her voice completely failed her whenever she stood before Lord Razilvisto. Realizing the underlying truth of her emotions, she knew her paralyzing silence did not stem from genuine fear. A blushing realization hit her as she admitted that her intense hyper-awareness of him as a captivating man caused her sudden muteness. Filled with aching longing, she desperately wished to find the courage to express her true feelings with absolute clarity. The comforting presence of the fluffy beast offered a vital moment of quiet, unspoken solace to her racing mind. Touched by the creature's gentle nuzzling, she warmly realized that Ravis was actively trying to mend her shattered spirits. Gratefully thanking the beast for lifting her mood, a renewed spark of determination ignited within her to execute the dance flawlessly. Approaching Lord Razilvisto with newfound resolve, she deeply apologized for her frustrating and clumsy behavior the previous day. Bowing her head in earnest dedication, she pleaded for his guidance once more while promising unbreakable concentration. Driven by the knowledge that he was sacrificing his precious private time, she swore to give her all to prevent any humiliation at the upcoming ball. To her absolute shock, the imposing Lord Razilvisto bluntly declared that all dancing was cancelled for the day. Panic gripped her racing heart as she frantically wondered if his patience for her incompetence had finally run dry completely. Before she could process her escalating anxiety, he suddenly closed the distance between them with predatory swiftness. Yelping in utter surprise as he seized her, she weakly protested his aggressive actions by reminding him of his own words. Her confused gasp violently died in her throat as his powerful arms firmly locked around her trembling frame. Staring deeply into her panicked eyes, he commanded her to conquer her crippling awareness of him by forcefully getting used to this intimate proximity before they ever danced again. Trembling with disbelief at the terrifying prospect of remaining locked in his tight embrace, her frantic question was instantly shot down as foolish. Despite her desperate internal screams that her racing heart would explode, he mercilessly ordered her to surrender, boldly declaring that a beast never releases its captured prey. Flushed with intense embarrassment, she internally panicked over the sheer extremity of the situation and the deadly humiliation of being caught in his arms. Brushing off her frantic shame, he coolly questioned why she hesitated to embrace him when she freely cuddled her beast companion all the time. Shivering as his deep voice vibrated directly against her ear, she mentally screamed that cuddling a pet and hugging a terrifyingly attractive lord were vastly different realms. Locked helplessly in his protective hold, the intoxicating intimacy made the moment feel dangerously identical to the embrace of true, genuine fiancés. Desperately attempting to escape the overwhelming heat of his body, she stammered out a blatant lie that she had miraculously gotten used to the torturous contact. Effortlessly shattering her flimsy defense, he sharply pointed out her fiercely burning red ears as undeniable, physical proof of her lie. With a smirk of unyielding authority, he cemented her doom by declaring that they would enforce this intimate physical contact every single day until her emotional immunity was successfully built. Staying chillingly true to his promise, every subsequent dance training session became a ruthless battlefield that incorporated mandatory, inescapable hugging sessions. Despite the agonizing awareness of their fake engagement, his shockingly gentle holds began to dangerously melt her defenses, driving her to desperately vent to her beast once more. Wailing to the oblivious Ravis that its master was utterly clueless about a woman's fragile heart, Esther resigned herself to an endless, tearful cycle of being hopelessly toyed with by the relentless Lord Razilvisto. A servant's voice pierces the quiet, announcing to Lady Esther that the grand carriage is finally ready for departure. Steeling her trembling nerves for the real ball, Esther firmly declares that she is on her way. The grand title card flashes, ushering in the dramatic tale of the beloved Villainess and the formidable monarch. Their imposing carriage rolls steadily until it halts near the heavily fortified border of the Eponent Kingdom. Exhaling a heavy sigh, Esther openly confesses to the crushing nervousness gnawing at her stomach. Recalling the grueling special training he provided, she fiercely resolves that she absolutely cannot afford to fail. A cheerful voice interrupts her anxious thoughts, praising Esther for looking exactly like a gorgeous princess in her gown. Esther expresses her deep gratitude to Bona for picking the dress, despite the back feeling slightly uncomfortable. The onlooker bursts into joyous laughter, describing the stunning sight of them standing together as literal beauty as violence. Utterly bewildered by the strange phrasing, Esther instantly questions the intense concept of using violence to describe beauty. Her companion frantically apologizes while another sternly commands the beast folk to hide their ears and stop spouting nonsense. Seamlessly shifting to a human form, the beast folk apologizes for the sudden surprise while showing off their convenient camouflage. Esther gazes in absolute awe, deeply impressed by the incredible convenience of their innate transformation magic. Regaining her composure thanks to Riunthio's steady support, she finally feels a powerful surge of calm readiness wash over her. Frantic whispers erupt across the grand hall as His Majesty, the terrifying King of Eponent, makes a phenomenally rare appearance. Sensing the suffocating tension in the room, Esther nervously wonders if the entire crowd is utterly terrified of Lord Razilvisto. The gossiping nobles stare in bewildered shock, frantically questioning the identity of the breathtaking woman standing beside the cold beast. Shrinking slightly under the oppressive weight of 100 distant stares, Esther finds the intense scrutiny incredibly uncomfortable. An observer sharply notes that her camouflage is working perfectly, as the intimidating aura guarantees no one will dare ask Esther to dance. Feeling a sharp pang of isolation, Esther sadly resigns herself to the reality that no one will want to dance with her tonight. Cutting through her spiraling insecurities, Razilvisto gently but firmly commands his little rabbit to stop worrying about such trivial things. He boldly declares that the crowd's fearful hesitation exists simply because everyone in the room knows she is his woman. Demanding absolute confidence from her, he urges her to stand proudly despite the swirling murmurs of the intimidated nobles. Grounding her with an intense gaze, he reminds her of her unyielding spirit by pointing out she never once gave up during practice. He orders her to stand tall and confidently blame any potential missteps directly on the man occupying her heart. Observing her dramatically shifting demeanor, he notes with deep satisfaction that she appears significantly calmer. Beaming with genuine gratitude, she sincerely thanks Lord Razilvisto for completely anchoring her scattered nerves. Razilvisto playfully fires back, teasingly asking if she truly plans to pin all the blame on him tonight. Her heart swells with newfound courage, realizing that his incredibly warm words guarantee she is far from alone on this battlefield. Utter shock strikes her when a polite gentleman suddenly steps out of the intimidating crowd and kindly asks her for a dance. Quickly catching her breath, she elegantly accepts the unexpected invitation by declaring she would be completely honored. Silently hyping herself up, she focuses intensely on recalling every single grueling practice session she shared with Lord Razilvisto. The gentleman gracefully thanks her as he respectfully leads her toward the glittering center of the magnificent ballroom floor. Floating flawlessly across the polished marble, a soaring sense of triumph hits her as she realizes she hasn't missed a single step. She spins around with eyes shining brilliantly, utterly thrilled that she executed the entire complex routine without making a mistake. The sheer perfection of her fluid movements leaves the breathless audience completely captivated by her overwhelming grace. Time itself seems to slow down as the dazzling momentum of the royal ballroom swirls chaotically around her elegant form. A sudden gasp escapes her parted lips as an incredibly unexpected presence steps into view and catches her completely off guard. Feeling as though she has stumbled straight into a fever dream, she frantically stammers that she is absolutely not Ravis. He steps dangerously close and stares intensely into her eyes, sharply clarifying that he wasn't praising her like a mere pet. Reflecting on the unexpected gentleness of her towering companion, Esther warmly realizes that Lord Razilvisto is not a cold-hearted beast after all. Touching her deeply flushed face, she vows to recount this surprisingly tender side of him to Ravis once she safely returns. A high-ranking nobleman respectfully addresses His Majesty, the terrifying King of Eponent, immediately commanding the stoic monarch's attention. Expressing deep gratitude for the king's rare presence at the grand ball, the host smoothly offers to pour him a glass of fine wine. Acknowledging the polite courtesy with a measured glance, Lord Razilvisto hesitates momentarily before accepting the hospitable gesture. The nobleman suddenly leans in, declaring with grave urgency that there is a critical matter he must bring to His Majesty's immediate attention. Caught slightly off guard by the abrupt shift in tone, Razilvisto sharply questions if this urgent message is intended specifically for him. The host swiftly reveals they have prepared a private, secluded room so the two of them may discuss the delicate situation at their absolute leisure. Instructing Esther to blend in like a wallflower and avoid drawing any attention, Razilvisto strides away to handle the private political matters. Left entirely alone amidst the swirling ballroom crowd, Esther watches his imposing figure vanish with a lingering sense of vulnerability. Attempting to literally blend in by pressing herself against the wall, she quickly realizes her painfully awkward stance is definitely not right. Recalling grim warnings about Lipperain plotting a dangerous invasion, she releases a heavy sigh and reminds herself to stay highly cautious. Standing by herself in the magnificent hall, she nervously admits that being separated from her powerful protector feels incredibly unsettling. Scanning the lavish surroundings for familiar faces, she wonders anxiously where Rianthio and the other royal attendants could have gone. A sudden, abrupt movement near the dark corridor catches her sharp eye, instantly shattering her anxious train of thought. Spotting the nobleman returning completely alone, she realizes with a massive jolt of alarm that Lord Razilvisto is no longer with him. Desperately hoping they merely passed each other in the winding halls, she decides she must hurry back to confirm his safety. Lurking deep within the oppressive shadows, a sinister voice coldly demands a progress report on their treacherous, unfolding operation. A loyal subordinate quickly confirms they have incapacitated all of Eponent's knights and tossed them securely into the East Tower's guest rooms. He maliciously boasts that Ruby Grass works flawlessly, turning even the most fearsome beastmen into drunken, helpless kittens. Eavesdropping from the pitch-black darkness, Esther violently shudders as the mastermind orders his men to finish off the sleeping knights. The cruel conspirator calculatingly explains that slaughtering the incapacitated knights will instantly cut Eponent's formidable military strength in half. A nervous henchman hesitantly questions the severe diplomatic risks involved in harming foreign dignitaries directly on Lipperain soil. Brushing off the cowardly concerns with a chilling sneer, the arrogant mastermind insists there is absolutely no problem with their bloody plan. Unveiling the true depths of his cruel scheme, he declares they will simply frame the cold-hearted beast for slaughtering his own subordinates. Horrified beyond belief, Esther realizes this entire grand event was an elaborate, deadly trap designed to exploit Lord Rashelvist's brutal rumors. The vile leader arrogantly scoffs into the shadows, vehemently declaring it fundamentally wrong for a nation led by such a monster to even exist. Trembling uncontrollably in her hidden spot, she finally grasps the terrifying magnitude of the deadly conspiracy surrounding them. A sudden, treacherous rustle of her elegant dress betrays her concealed position, drawing the razor-sharp attention of the ruthless men. The mastermind aggressively barks at the unseen intruder to stop hiding and step out, leaving Esther completely frozen in sheer panic. Realizing the fatal peril of her exposed situation, she desperately concludes she must sprint away and call someone for immediate help. Before she can even turn to flee, the menacing figures rapidly close in, completely cutting off her only available route of escape. Stepping fully into the dim light, the villainous nobleman mockingly greets her as the widely rumored fiancée of the beast. Fixing her with a cold, dead-eyed glare, he chillingly notes that she clearly overheard every single word of their treasonous conversation. Summoning every ounce of her remaining courage, Esther furiously demands if they have absolutely no shame in murdering their honored guests. Fiercely defending his honor, she boldly screams that Lord Rashelvist is not some beast, prompting the villain to mock her feisty spirit. Completely unfazed by her righteous anger, the mastermind coldly asks if she truly comprehends the hopeless, fatal situation she is in. Staring unblinkingly into the face of death, she fiercely points her finger and labels them as the true villains of this story. Raising his lethal weapon with a sadistic smirk, the killer mockingly advises her to direct her dying resentment toward her beastly lover. As the overwhelming killing intent washes over her trembling body, a chilling, paralyzing realization hits her that she is going to die. The title card flashes, announcing the dramatic tale of a banished noble daughter captured and doted on by a terrifying majesty. Esther cowers helplessly, weeping that she simply cannot take the overwhelming terror of the situation anymore. A sudden gasp escapes her trembling lips as a commanding presence unexpectedly shatters the tense atmosphere. The villain's sword is violently deflected as Rashelvist materializes from thin air to intercept the lethal blow. Rashelvist stands menacingly in the shadows, radiating a suffocating aura of pure, unadulterated killing intent. Utterly stunned by her savior's timely arrival, Esther whispers His Highness's title in breathless disbelief. Paralyzed by his overwhelming presence, the terrified assassin weakly begs the monstrous king to stay back. Moving with blinding speed, Rashelvist viciously kicks the assailant squarely in the jaw to send him flying. Glaring down at the pathetic thug, he coldly commands the men never to casually touch his precious prey. The brutal physical impact leaves the crushed assassin gasping for air on the cold stone floor. Pinning the broken mastermind under his heavy boot, Rashelvist stares him down with merciless, predatory eyes. Demanding immediate answers with a deadly growl, he sharply interrogates the bleeding man about his missing companions. Trembling in absolute agony, the broken conspirator confesses they are locked away on the second floor of the Eastern Tower. Instructing Esther to go wake everyone up immediately, Rashelvist grimly vows to completely take care of the treacherous assassins. Desperately pleading with him to wait, Esther begs him to hand the men over to the kingdom's knights instead of taking their lives. Furious at her sheer naivety, he sharply scolds her for spouting such relaxed nonsense right after nearly dying. Reminding her of the brutal reality of their situation, he aggressively points out that she was literally just about to be murdered. Scoffing at her idealistic suggestion, he declares he absolutely cannot trust the kingdom's knights during such a volatile state ball. Highlighting the cruel nature of reality, he insists she should know perfectly well that people will mercilessly trample over others without a second thought. He fiercely warns her that acting hopelessly naive in a world governed by survival of the fittest will only guarantee she gets devoured. Gently acknowledging his harsh truth, Esther sadly admits that the world might indeed never be kind to them. Stepping forward with unwavering resolve, she tearfully declares that she simply doesn't want him to become a true villain. Acknowledging the ferocious beast lurking within his highness, she firmly believes that darkness is not the only thing defining him. Looking deeply into his eyes, she vows to believe in him completely, no matter who rejects him or how tightly he closes his heart. Stunned into total silence, Rashelvist simply stares at her, profoundly moved by her breathtaking, unyielding devotion. Releasing a soft, defeated chuckle, he admits to himself that he completely loses his rhythm whenever he is around her. Sprinting frantically through the winding corridors, Esther desperately races toward the second floor of the eastern tower to save her friends. Bursting into the guest room, she sighs with immense relief upon seeing Rianthio and the others resting safely unharmed. Shaking his unresponsive shoulders, she urgently commands Mr. Rianthio to wake up immediately because danger is imminent. Snoring softly in a magically induced slumber, Rianthio remains completely oblivious to her desperate, panicked shouting. Frantically pacing around the sleeping figures, she wonders in sheer panic what she must do to break the deep spell. Her desperate eyes rapidly scan the quiet room, frantically searching for absolutely anything that might help rouse the incapacitated knights. A sudden spark of inspiration hits her as she spots something incredibly useful resting quietly on a nearby shelf. Grabbing a handful of raw tea leaves, she hopes the intensely bitter taste will somehow shock Rianthio completely sober. Shoving the leaves directly into his mouth, Rianthio instantly jolts awake, violently spitting out the disgustingly bitter taste. Smiling warmly at his dramatic reaction, she expresses sheer joy that he has finally returned to his senses. Coughing uncontrollably from the awful taste, a bewildered Rianthio demands to know exactly what horrible thing she just fed him. Apologizing profusely, she hastily explains they were raw tea leaves that are painfully bitter when eaten straight. Still gagging on the horrific lingering aftertaste, Rianthio struggles to fully process the chaotic, sudden wake-up call. Suddenly remembering the dire situation at hand, Rianthio snaps to full attention and frantically asks about His Majesty's safety. Recalling his earlier state, Esther realizes Rashelvisto sustained a hand injury while capturing the ringleader to shield her from a deadly blade. Rianthio anxiously explains that the overwhelmingly high alcohol content of rubygrass liquor is far too strong for beastmen and deeply worries him regarding His Highness. Taking swift control of the chaotic situation, Rianthio barks a fierce order for the guards to aggressively search the tower from the top floor down. The guards eagerly confirm the urgent command as Rianthio orders Esther to stick close and come with him. Sprinting purposefully down the grand hallways, they firmly resolve to sweep the area and thoroughly check every single room. Splitting up for maximum efficiency, Rianthio instructs Esther to sweep the far side while he fiercely searches the near corridor. Nodding with fierce determination, Esther confirms the urgent command and immediately springs into action. Sprinting breathlessly, she anxiously wonders if the potent rubygrass deeply affects all species despite him appearing perfectly sober earlier. A sudden gasp escapes her lips as a jarring realization momentarily halts her frantic dash through the desolate corridor. Her heart clenches with profound guilt as she realizes he selflessly protected her without harming a single soul. Gripping her flowing dress with mounting anxiety, she pushes her trembling legs to sprint even faster down the shadowed hall. Throwing a heavy wooden door wide open, she desperately prays to find him quickly and confirm his absolute safety. Bursting into a dimly lit room, she instantly spots a slumped figure and frantically screams Lord Rashelvisto's name. Creeping closer to his massive form, she listens to his heavy breathing and softly wonders if he is merely asleep. Collapsing onto her knees beside him, an overwhelming wave of sheer relief violently washes over her exhausted body. Wiping tears of profound relief from her eyes, she suddenly remembers the bleeding gash marring his powerful hand. Carefully inspecting the painful injury, she resolves to treat the shallow but agonizing cut immediately and properly. Moving with gentle precision, she swiftly wraps a clean white bandage tightly around his bleeding palm. Securing the knot with extreme care, she successfully halts the bleeding and firmly protects his scarred skin. Leaning in closely, she softly whispers that Rianthio is safe before desperately begging Lord Resolvisto to wake up. A low groan rumbles from his chest, signaling his returning consciousness and flooding her heart with fierce hope. Slowly blinking his heavy eyes open, the groggy monarch gazes up and softly breathes Esther's name into the quiet room. Utterly shocked by the unprecedented intimacy, a bright crimson blush rapidly explodes across her stunned face. Overwhelmed by the stunning realization that he finally used her real name, she freezes in breathless silence.